Hi, I'm Norm Abram. They say it's going to rain today, but that's not going to stop us. We have a nice, dry, warm workshop where we can do a woodworking project. Many of you have written to us about kitchen cabinets. Now, we've built a few projects for the kitchen. For instance, a few years ago, we built a kitchen island out of cherry with 3 large recycling drawers. Today, we're going to build another island. You'll be able to paint it any color you want. There are plenty of drawers for storage. There's a recess for your stools, and there's even a recycling bin. So let's build a new kitchen island right here in the new Yankee Workshop.
Funding is provided by...
Here I'm beginning to build the base for our island, made up of pieces of 3/4-inch plywood, which I'm assembling with screws. If you take a bird's eye view, you start to get a sense of what we're trying to do here. Above this area will be a bank of drawers that'll pull out in that direction. In the middle, a recycling bin. And over here, another bank of drawers. I've also left space for a wine cooler. On this side of those cabinets will be a pedestal on this end, another one down here, and that'll create a recess for the stools. On top of the entire cabinet system will be a butcher block top, 9'2" by 3 feet, good size island. Now, if you like the way this island turns out and you'd like to build one of your own, a measured drawing will be available with the materials list, and you'll hear more about that before the program ends. Now, you'll note that I'm not using any glue in this assembly. After this is together, I'm going to put a piece of plywood to make the base or floor of the cabinet. That will hold everything together. All the interior surfaces of this cabinet will be built with this pre-finished maple plywood. And we like this material because the finish is much tougher than anything we could ever apply here in the shop. So tough, in fact, that it won't even scratch when we run it through the machinery. The advantage of using it is that we don't have to finish the inside of the cabinet, and it makes the cabinet easier to clean for the homeowner. Now, this is a 3/4-inch sheet, and I need to rip a piece out of it for that floor. So the first thing I want to do is get it over to my saw, and I set it on the saw table and on my work table behind me, which is the same height as the table saw. It's like having another pair of hands. Now, the other advantage is that I have an outfeed table here that as the sheet comes through, it's long enough so that when I clear the blade, it's not going to fall off the table. Now, before we use any power tools, let's talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. I'm going to set my fence about 1/4 of an inch wider than the piece I actually need because inevitably there are little dings along the edge, and with the second pass I can get rid of those. Now, the procedure is important, and what I do is bring the sheet to that fence and make sure that it's parallel. There's no gap where the sheet meets the fence. And as I push it through, I'm really looking at that intersection. If I keep that tight, I don't have to worry about the blade. The motion is to push against the fence and slide it through the blade, both at the same time in a very smooth pass. To cut these strips of plywood to length, it's safer to use a straight edge and a circular saw. On the floor of the cabinet, I've laid out for a couple shallow dados. The vertical partitions will slip into that slot, and that adds a lot of strength to the cabinet. Now, 3/4-inch plywood isn't exactly 3/4 of an inch thick anymore. It's just a little under, 23/32. I do have a 23/32 router bit for making those grooves, but when I ran the test piece in this scrap, it's still a little snug. So after I make the first pass, I'll tap the straight edge over and make a second pass. Now that's going to have the effect of widening the dado a fraction of an inch. Here I have 2 3.5-inch wide cleats, and I'm routing a dado slightly deeper than the ones I did earlier, and these will intersect the top of the partitions. On each end of those cleats, I need a rabbet to sit over the top of the end panels. Now, there's one more thing I have to do before I can assemble this piece. I have to make a notch in one of the end panels that creates a toe kick space. It's 4 inches high and 3.5 inches deep. Now I want to pre-drill for some screws through the floor, which will attach the partitions. And it's easier to drill the holes down the center of the dado. That way I don't need a layout line on the other side. Then I just flip the whole thing over and make the countersink for the head. Well, now we're ready to go with assembling the partitions to the floor. A little bit of glue. I'm going to use one of these squares just to hold it in the right position. That can be held in with a couple clamps. Then I'll tip it up and drive some screws. I've learned the hard way that if you don't pre-drill for these screws, it can split the plywood. Now the floor goes on the base, flush on the back side, which is the side with the long leg, and I want it to stick over the end about 1/8 of an inch. And then I'll secure it with some 1.5 inch brads. Now for one of the end panels, some more glue in the dado. And because the floor hangs over a bit, I'll just slip into place. We'll nail it and screw it. All of this will be covered in the final stages. Now here's the panel on the other end that has the toe kick notch, and there's also a notch at the back here to go over the base. Now for the cleats. Glue in the rabbets and the dados, and they'll get attached with some screws once again. And these not only hold the top of the partitions in alignment, but they also are great because they give me a way to attach the countertop later. Okay, and that's the last screw in the back cleat. Now the back is some more of that pre-finished plywood, this time 1/2 inch thickness, and I'm going to attach it with some narrow crown staples instead of screws. Staples hold really well in plywood. This side of the cabinet won't be seen later, so we don't have to worry about the staples showing. Now this end of the plywood is the factory edge, and I've checked it to make sure that it's square and it's right on. So that means that if I bring this top corner of the cabinet, even with the end of the plywood, the whole carcass will be square. Now here's the piece that's going to be behind the ice maker, and there's not much holding it in place yet, but later there'll be an end panel that'll connect to it. I have a sample here in the shop of parts for a raised panel door. If I turn it over, it looks very much like a shaker door, and that's the style we're going to use on this project. A flat panel, square edges where they meet, no fancy edge. All the rails and stiles require a groove to receive the panel, and that groove is also useful because it'll receive the tenons from the rails. Let me show you the setup to make those grooves. At the table saw, I'm using the 2 outer blades from my dado. I've installed a feather board to keep the stock tightly up against the fence. I'm using 3/4 inch poplar for all the rails and stiles. I've set the dado as close as possible to the center. I'll run the stock through first, turn it around, run it through again, and that will center the groove perfectly in the thickness of the stock. Here I'm laying out one of the panels. It happens to be the narrowest one. I need to form tenons on these small rails to fit into the grooves I made earlier. Those tenons are made over here at the table saw using the sacrificial fence, the dado, and my miter gauge to guide the pieces through. The panels are made out of 1/2 inch plywood, and I need to rabbet the plywood so that it'll fit into the groove I made earlier. And I like to use 1/2 inch rather than 1/4 inch because then the panel can't flex. The setup is the same. The dado and the sacrificial fence, I've only changed the height. I like to dry fit all the pieces together before I apply any glue to make sure the joints are nice and tight. That's good. I've applied glue where these tenons meet the stiles. No glue on the panel. That's just going to sit in there freely to float. And the stiles are a little long now, but I'll trim those off when I fit the panels. All right, a little bit of clamp pressure to squeeze everything together. And we'll set that one aside. Now, before I leave here tonight, I have 6 more panels to build. I think I can get them done. Well, good morning. I did stick around long enough last night to finish up the small panels. The large one has far too many joints to try to assemble it all at once, so I've already glued the stiles into the lower rail. And now I'm going to install the panels. All the techniques for making the panels and the rails and stiles are the same as what you saw earlier. Once these panels are in, we'll glue that top rail up. A little bit of careful persuasion and a few clamps, and I can set this aside to dry. At the table saw, I can trim up those stiles and make sure the panels are nice and square. And over here, I've started to assemble one of the end caps. This is the end of the island, and these 2 small panels form the pedestal on the far side of the island. I'm going to build the second one over here. First thing I want to do is spread some glue where the 2 panels meet. I'll set the panel in place, make sure it's nice and even with the edge, and secure it with a couple brads and then clamp it. And these little glue blocks will reinforce the intersection. And now for the large end panel, the procedure is the same as the little one. Well, now's the time to sand the big panel, because once it gets assembled, it'll be very difficult. Now here's the setup for the back panel. I've applied some glue to the end panel. I'm going to line it up and attach everything with some 1 5/8" screws. This cleat will be helpful in attaching this panel system to the carcass. Okay, this is how the 2 elements slide together. I'll get them all lined up, hold it with a few clamps, and then secure it by driving some screws from the inside. Now I'm ready to start building a face frame. It'll be made out of 3/4" poplar. It'll cover these plywood edges, and it'll frame either a drawer or a door. Now I'm using this story pole that I made earlier, and it shows all the major intersections for these cabinets. Here's the plywood partition right here, a stile, same thing here, here, and here. And I use this stick for laying out the partitions, and now it comes in handy for the face frame. I line up the rails for the face frame on the end of the story pole, go down this end, and mark them for length. This method is much more accurate than using a steel tape. There are several methods to joining the parts of a face frame. I could use half-lap joints, I could use dowels, but I like pocket screw technology. There's a pocket that I've drilled in one of the pieces, and by using a screw, the pieces are sucked together. It makes a very strong joint, and it's very simple. To make the pocket, I need a jig. Here's a single hole jig with a clamp. I just set that in position. It requires a special bit, which has a small shank to drill the pilot hole, a large shank to drill the pocket, and a collar as a stop. The jig has a precise angle so that when I drill through, the pocket is created and the pilot will come out right in the middle of the thickness of the piece. Watch. Now, obviously, all this work occurs on the back side of the face frame. And then it's just a matter of driving the screw until it's pulled together. Now with glue applied to all the edges of the plywood, I can position the assembled face frame and secure it with some 1.5-inch brads. Well, now it's time to build some drawer boxes, and we're trying something new in the workshop and we really like it. You can now go to your local plywood supplier and pick up 8-foot lengths of pre-finished drawer side stock. Totally finished with an edge band on the top edge. Comes in 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12-inch widths. All of those except for the 12-inch have a 1/4-inch groove for the bottom of the drawer. Think of the time that this is going to save in the workshop. Now, I want to join the fronts to the sides with dovetail joints. So I've set up my dovetailing jig. Here's the front, here's the side, and using a router with a collar and a dovetailing bit, I can route both the pins and the tails in one step. Let's do a trial fit. Nice and snug. That's going to fit fine. Now that dado in the side piece will allow me to attach the back of each drawer. Those notches at each end of the back of the drawer box are necessary for the particular hardware that we're using. All right, it's time for a little bit of assembly. Spreading glue on both the tails and the pins so they join together. And I'll just use a block of wood to drive it flush. Now for the bottom, a piece of 1/4-inch plywood, which is also pre-finished. All right, now for the back, fits into those dados I made earlier, and there's glue there as well, and I'll secure the joint with a few brads. Now all the drawers are built exactly the same way. Now I'm ready to start working on the drawer fronts. This is a frame for the front with a groove for a 1/4-inch plywood panel that's going to sit in there. I need to make tenons on the ends of these long pieces to fit in the groove of the short ones. The setup is here, just like earlier, stacked dado, sacrificial fence, a couple passes through with my miter gauge will form that tenon. Now I'm going to take a piece of 1/2-inch plywood and make a rabbet on all 4 edges so that it'll fit into that groove. Now I'm just about ready for some assembly, and I am going to put a little bit of glue in the groove. I don't want that panel in these drawer fronts to move around. Once we get these all together, we'll head for the clamps. All right, that takes care of the first drawer front. 5 more to go. Once the glue is set, I'll fit them to the openings. You got to see this, our drawer slides. They are state-of-the-art, full extension, 100-pound capacity, and they're totally concealed. You never see them. Now those get attached to the side of the cabinet, and on the drawer bottom there are a piece of hardware. This little attachment piece goes right in the corner, and I pre-drill some holes for a couple screws. You'll notice that the screw is at a slight slant. Now here at the back I need to drill a hole. And I've made this little template, and I just use a 1/4-inch brad point bit. Okay, let's see how it fits. Just a simple matter of sliding it in place, dropping it on those slides, and then pushing it in. And there it is. They work beautiful. Now to attach the drawer front, I slip it in the opening, and I like to use these little wedges and center it in the opening. And then I'll tack it with a couple brads from the inside. I love the way these drawers come out. I just squeeze those iron handles, and it's released. Now what I'm going to do is pre-drill some holes to attach the front permanently with screws. Now I'm working on the trash bin or the recycling center. This is the door face down, and I built a couple boxes using the same techniques as I did for the drawers. This one is dovetailed at both the front and the back for reinforcement. This one has no bottom, but the piece that I just rabbited on the table saw is going to drop into place, be secured with some glue and nails, and later we'll cut a hole in it to receive a wastebasket. I want to reinforce that piece with these small cleats, which will also get glued and nailed in place. Now, I like to add these cleats because there'll be a fair amount of stress on this piece as the wastebasket is loaded with trash or recycling. I attach the upper and lower elements with screws. This piece of plywood connects the back of the elements. We need that for extra strength. Now there's a change of slides here. I didn't want to reduce the size of this opening at all, so I'm using these side mount slides. They only take a 1/2 inch space on each side. However, they are still full extension and they'll carry 100 pounds. Put the slide attached to the unit, just slide it into place. And that's it. Later we'll cut the hole. Here I'm assembling a ladder frame built out of scrap 3/4 inch plywood and assembled with 1 5/8 screws. Now I'm going to double up the leading edge with another piece and glue it and nail it in place. Now I'm going to apply a piece of 1/2 inch finished plywood to one side of this frame. Now this whole assembly drops between the two pedestals, and I'm going to make it removable because the kitchen that this is going into hasn't even been built yet. And the final piece is this poplar rail, and I'll simply attach that with some brackets. Well, Wade, thanks for coming over on your day off to give me a hand with this, my neighbor who works nights. For the top on our island, we picked a laminated maple top, which is perfect for any hard-working kitchen island. And now you can start to see how you can prepare food on this side of the island and have seating on the far side. This was a very useful project to build. And if you think your kitchen is ready for a new or a replacement island, maybe it's time to build one. Now let me show you what we're going to build next time.